The construction cranes above Midland, Texas are not moving. Not because of wind, not because of a strike, not because of a federal holiday or a safety inspection. Those cranes are not moving because the men who operated them packed their tools 3 days ago and drove north, across the border, back to Canada. And they are not coming back. And here's what makes this moment different from every other labor dispute, every other political controversy, every other trade fight you have watched play out over the past 4 years. This one has a bill, a real one, with a number attached to it, $8 billion. $8 billion in stalled projects, delayed timelines, cost overruns, and infrastructure sitting half-built across Texas, Pennsylvania, New York, and Louisiana. $8 billion and counting. And it all traces back to a single press conference, a single sentence, a single moment where the President of the United States walked up to a microphone and said something that no one in the construction industry, no one in the energy sector, no one who has ever held a welding torch or climbed a steel column in their life could believe they were hearing. He called them replaceable. Stay with me, because by the time we get through what actually happened in the weeks that followed, you are going to understand exactly how expensive that one word turned out to be. Let's start with where this happened, because the setting matters. Houston, Texas, a press conference following a private meeting between the president and American energy executives. The kind of meeting where everyone in the room is talking about projects, pipelines, expansion, investment, billions of dollars of infrastructure that needs to get built. And one of the reporters in the room asked a straightforward question, a policy question, about the bilateral skilled labor agreements that have been in place between the United States and Canada for decades. Agreements that allow Canadian tradespeople to work on American industrial projects. Agreements that every major construction company and energy firm in this country depends on to staff the large-scale projects that the domestic American workforce simply cannot fill on its own. A reasonable question, a relevant question, the kind of question that deserves a measured, policy-driven answer. What the president said instead, folks, was not that. He said, and I'm going to read this to you because you need to hear the exact words. He said, "Canadian workers, look, I hear a lot about Canadian workers. They come down here, they work on our projects, and frankly, they're overrated. Very overrated. We have the best workers in the world right here in America. The best. Canadian workers are fine, they're okay, but we don't need them. We really don't. They should be grateful to work on American projects. They should be grateful we let them in. And honestly, they're replaceable. Every single one of them is replaceable with an American worker who would do the job just as well, maybe better, for less money." And then he went further. "Canada keeps acting like they're doing us a favor by sending workers down here. They're not doing us a favor. We're doing them a favor. We're giving their people jobs, good jobs on American soil. And if Prime Minister Carney wants to play games with that arrangement, fine. We'll replace them by Tuesday. Replace them by Tuesday." I want you to hold that sentence in your mind while we talk about what happened next, because Tuesday came, and then another Tuesday, and another one after that. And those cranes in Midland, Texas, still not moving. Now, let's talk about what those words actually meant to the people who heard them, because the president did not say those words into a vacuum. He said them on camera, with microphones pointed at him, in a room full of reporters. And within 3 hours, those words had reached every Canadian skilled tradesperson working on an American job site from the Gulf Coast to the Great Lakes. 3 hours. Not 3 days, not 3 weeks. 3 hours later, the Canadian government had already begun its response. And here is where this story stops being just another political back and forth and starts being something that directly affects the American economy in ways that most people were not prepared for. Prime Minister Mark Carney did not call a press conference to express disappointment. He did not send a strongly worded diplomatic note. He did not ask for a phone call or a sit-down or a clarification. He activated a response that, looking back, had clearly been prepared for exactly this kind of moment. First, the Canadian Department of Labor issued an immediate advisory to all Canadian skilled tradespeople working on American projects, recommending that they return to Canada within 30 days. The language cited, directly, the hostile and disrespectful environment created by the president's statements. Second, Carney announced the immediate suspension of the bilateral skilled labor mobility agreements. Third, he announced expedited work permit processing for Canadian tradespeople seeking employment on projects in Canada, the European Union, the United Kingdom, Australia, and the Gulf states. In other words, he opened every other door in the world at the exact same moment he began closing the American one. Fourth, and this is the one that the construction industry will be talking about for years, he announced a retention bonus, $20,000, for any Canadian tradesperson who returned from an American project and committed to Canadian domestic work for 2 years, funded entirely from tariff revenue collected on American imports. Read that again. Canada used the money it collected from American tariffs to pay Canadian workers to come home from American job sites. That is not a coincidence. That is a policy. That is a deliberate, surgical, economically coherent response to a public insult. And it worked. Carney's statement that evening was different in tone from anything he had said in nearly 2 years of trade confrontations with this administration. He said, "Canadian workers are not overrated. They are not replaceable. They are not grateful for the privilege of building someone else's country. They are the best trained, most certified, most professional, skilled tradespeople in the world. And they deserve to work in environments where their skill is respected, their contribution is valued, and their dignity is intact." If the President of the United States believes that Canadian welders, pipe fitters, iron workers, and electricians are replaceable, we respectfully invite him to replace them. We respectfully invite him to replace them. So, what happened when he tried? Within 72 hours of that press conference, the replacement test began, and it failed. Let me walk you through each failure, one by one, because each one of these is not just a project delay. Each one is a proof point. Each one is the construction industry answering the president's claim with the most expensive possible counterargument. Midland, Texas. A major pipeline project lost 14 certified welders from a single crew. Now, I need you to understand what that sentence actually means, because when most people hear welders, they think of someone with a torch and a mask doing basic metal work. That is not what we're talking about here. These were journeymen with certifications in specialized welding processes that fewer than 500 people in all of North America are qualified to perform. 500 people on an entire continent. And 14 of them just walked off that site. The American welders who remained told their project manager that the critical welds on the remaining sections could not be completed without the Canadian crew. Not delayed, not slowed down, could not be completed. The project manager picked up the phone and called 3 other pipeline contractors in the region. Every single one told him the same thing. No available welders with that certification. None. They hadn't had any for 2 years. The pipeline project is now 7 months behind schedule. The project manager, a 30-year veteran of the energy industry, said something that morning that stopped a reporter cold. He said, "We cannot finish this job. Not late, not over budget. We cannot finish it at all." The people who knew how to do the critical welds are gone, and there is nobody left in this country who can do what they did. That is the sound of a $400 million mistake. And it started with the word replaceable. Pennsylvania. A nuclear reactor maintenance shutdown was postponed indefinitely. The team of Canadian specialists who performed the complex maintenance on reactor vessel internals had been recalled to Canada following the advisory. The utility's chief operating officer informed federal regulators that the postponement would last an estimated 4 to 6 months, while the company attempted to locate and qualify alternative personnel. The cost of the postponement, including replacement power purchases and extended operational modifications, was estimated at $75 million for one facility, one team. Gone because the President of the United States said their country should be grateful for the chance to do the work. Manhattan, New York. An iron worker crew of 11 Canadians who had worked together as a unit for 8 years walked off a high-rise project on a Wednesday morning. The site superintendent, an American with 25 years in New York construction, told reporters he stood in the construction elevator after they told him and stared at the floor for 5 minutes. 5 minutes. This is a man who has managed job sites through blizzards, labor disputes, supply chain collapses, a pandemic. And he stood in that elevator and stared at the floor for 5 minutes. He told a local news affiliate, You don't replace 8 years of teamwork in a job posting. That takes a decade to build, and it's gone because someone who has never climbed a steel column called them replaceable. That crew set structural steel faster than any crew he had ever managed. Their safety record was perfect. Not good, perfect. They communicated without talking, anticipating each other's moves through years of shared experience and accumulated trust. The superintendent had spent 3 years trying to find an American crew with the same efficiency. He never found one. Louisiana. An LNG terminal expansion that was 7 months from completion stopped cold. The Canadian crane operators and pipe-fitting crews that had been on site for 2 full years packed their tools and drove north. The project's completion date is now listed as unknown. The estimated cost overrun, according to company documents filed with state regulators, is $400 million. $400 million. One project, one departure. Because a single press conference called their people replaceable. Now let's zoom out because I need to give you the numbers that explain why this is not a temporary problem. Why this cannot be fixed by posting a job listing or running a training program or waiting a few months until things cool down politically. The numbers tell a story that the White House cannot spin, and they have been building for 40 years. America is currently short an estimated 650,000 skilled construction workers. Not a little short, not slightly understaffed. 650,000 people short. The average age of a certified welder in the United States is 55 years old. 55. That means the workforce is aging out faster than it is being replenished. For every 5 skilled tradespeople who retire in America, only 3 enter the field to replace them. For every 5 who leave, 3 come in. Do that math across 40 years, and you understand why a pipeline in Texas cannot find 14 welders. Apprenticeship enrollment in the construction trades has declined 31% over the past 2 decades. 31%. An entire generation was told, explicitly told, by parents and teachers and college counselors and educational policy that working with your hands was somehow lesser, that a 4-year degree was the only respectable path, that the trades were a fallback for people who couldn't make it into a university. And so they went. They went to universities, they got degrees, and the pipelines and the reactors and the skyscrapers still needed to get built by someone. The Canadian workers who filled that gap were not taking American jobs. Let me say that again clearly. They were not taking jobs that American workers wanted and were qualified for. They were doing work that American companies could not find American workers to perform. There is a difference. There is a massive difference. And the construction industry has known this for years. They recruited those workers actively, deliberately, at significant cost, because the domestic supply of those specific skills does not exist. Canadian welders hold Red Seal certifications. That is Canada's national standard for trade qualification. It requires between 6,000 and 10,000 hours of supervised, on-the-job training combined with technical classroom instruction before certification is granted. Canadian welding certifications in pressure vessel and pipeline applications require testing protocols that exceed American Welding Society standards in several critical categories. These are among the most highly trained, skilled tradespeople in the Western Hemisphere, and the President of the United States called them overrated and replaceable in the same breath. Then came the human stories. And this is the part where the spreadsheets stop mattering, and the real cost of those words becomes clear. There is a welder in Texas. His name is Mark. He spent 12 years building American pipelines. He arrived at 26 years old with a duffel bag and a welding hood. Over those 12 years, he trained 14 American apprentice welders. 14. He bought a truck in Odessa. He went to a Baptist church with his American girlfriend's family on Sundays. He coached a youth baseball team. His foreman, an American, a Texan, a man who had worked oil field construction for 30 years, called Mark the best welder he had ever supervised in 3 decades on the job. When the advisory came, Mark spent 2 days deciding what to do. He did not want to leave. Texas was home. His foreman called him, voice breaking, and said, "I don't want you to go. Nobody here wants you to go. But I understand." Mark told a Canadian broadcaster, "He called me replaceable. I've been here 12 years. I train the guys who are going to have to finish this pipeline without me. I coach their kids' baseball team. And the President of the United States went on television and said I should be grateful, and I'm replaceable. I'm not angry. I'm hurt. There's a difference. Angry, I'd stay and fight. Hurt, I go home. And I'm going home. He can replace me. Let him try. Let him try. In New York, an iron worker foreman named Gene had been in the city for 6 years. He had an apartment in Queens. He ate lunch at the same deli on Lexington Avenue every single workday for 6 years. The deli owner, a Greek immigrant who had been in New York for 30 years himself, taped a handwritten sign to his window the day Gene told him he was leaving. It read, "We'll miss our Canadian boys. They is not replaceable to us." Gene told a reporter, "I love this city. I love the skyline. Every time I look up and see steel I put there, I feel proud. But pride has a limit. I won't work where the man in charge of the country I'm working in goes on television and says I should be grateful. I'm not grateful. I'm skilled. There's a difference. Grateful is what you feel when someone gives you something you didn't earn. I earned every inch of every beam I've ever set. I earned every inch." These are not political statements. These are not diplomatic chess moves. These are working people. People who got up before dawn and went to job sites in heat and rain and cold and did work that most people watching this video couldn't do if you gave them a year to train. And they were told on national television that they should feel lucky for the chance to do it. Now here is where this story takes a turn that nobody in Washington saw coming. The political blowback didn't come from where the White House expected. It didn't come from Democrats. It didn't come from media critics or foreign governments or trade economists. The blowback came from the trades themselves, from the construction industry, from the energy sector, from the working class base that this administration has spent 4 years telling the country it represents. 3 American trade unions, and these are not progressive organizations. These are not political opponents of this administration. These are the International Brotherhood of Boilermakers, the United Association of Plumbers and Pipe Fitters, and the International Association of Bridge, Structural, Ornamental, and Reinforcing Iron Workers, issued a joint statement. American unions, publicly defending Canadian workers, publicly condemning an American president's remarks about the trades. That does not happen. That has not happened. And yet it happened. The statement read, "Skilled tradespeople, regardless of nationality, deserve respect for their training, their certification, and their contribution to the projects they build." The remarks made by the President of the United States were an insult not only to Canadian workers, but to the trades themselves. When the president calls skilled workers replaceable, he diminishes every welder, every pipe fitter, every iron worker in America and Canada alike. Skill is not defined by a passport. Craftsmanship does not recognize borders. These were unions whose members overwhelmingly supported this administration in the previous election cycle. These were workers who stood at rallies, who cheered trade policies they believed would protect American jobs. And they broke publicly, not over a tariff, not over a tax policy, not over a piece of legislation. They broke because the president attacked working people. He attacked skill. He attacked the trades. And their people, the actual tradespeople who sweat through double shifts on pipeline rights-of-way and high-rise job sites, felt it personally, because it was personal. Governors of 6 states with major construction and energy projects wrote to the White House demanding the immediate restoration of the bilateral labor agreements. One governor, a Republican, a man who had supported this president through every previous confrontation, said publicly, "My state has $12 billion in active energy projects that depend on Canadian skilled labor. The president's remarks have jeopardized every single one of them. I need those workers back. My state needs those workers back. And calling them replaceable doesn't make it true. It makes us look foolish. It makes us look foolish." Let's talk about the full cost, because by now the numbers have climbed high enough that the White House cannot dismiss them. A construction industry association now projects that the total cost of the Canadian worker departure across all affected sectors will exceed $8 billion within the first year if the bilateral labor agreements are not restored. $8 billion. Because a president went on television and called skilled workers overrated. Let me break that down across the projects we already know about. The pipeline project in Midland, Texas, $400 million in projected overruns, and that number is growing. The nuclear reactor postponement in Pennsylvania, $75 million for one facility, one team, 4 to 6 months of delay. The LNG terminal in Louisiana, $400 million in cost overruns, with a completion date currently listed as unknown. The Manhattan high-rise project, timeline undetermined, costs escalating. And those are only the projects that made the news. There are dozens more. There are projects across this country, in states red and blue, in industries that most people never think about until the lights go out, or the gas stops flowing, or the building they're walking into fails an inspection. And all of them are running slower, running over budget, or not running at all. Because the workforce that knew how to do the most technically demanding parts of the work packed their tools and went home. The president said he could replace them by Tuesday. It has been a month. The pipeline is still waiting. The high-rise in Manhattan is still waiting. The nuclear reactor in Pennsylvania is still waiting. The LNG terminal in Louisiana is still waiting. American foremen, American project managers, American construction executives stand on job sites from Texas to New York to Louisiana that are suddenly half-staffed. And they say the same thing, over and over, in every interview, in every conversation, in every statement filed with regulators. We cannot finish this without them. We literally cannot finish this without them. And here's the part of this story that I keep coming back to, the part that feels the most important. Before that press conference, most Americans had no idea that tens of thousands of Canadian tradespeople were embedded in the American industrial workforce. They went to work. They did their jobs. They built the pipelines and the reactors and the towers and the terminals. They went home. Nobody outside the construction and energy industries knew or cared. They were invisible. The president tried to diminish them. He thought he was scoring a political point about American greatness and Canadian dependence. But what he actually did, without intending to, was make them visible. Every stalled project became a proof point. Every cost overrun became an invoice for the insult. Every delayed timeline became a measurement of exactly how replaceable these workers were. Which is to say, not at all. Which is to say, the opposite of replaceable. Which is to say, irreplaceable in the most literal, operational, undeniable sense of that word. He said overrated. Their absence proved they were undervalued. He said replaceable. 3 weeks later, not a single one of the 400 positions has been filled. He said grateful. They said skilled. And then they drove home and left the crane standing still. There is a project manager in Midland, Texas, a 30-year veteran who has built pipelines across 4 countries, who told reporters this week that he has never in 3 decades said what he had to say this morning. He has delivered bad news to clients before. He has managed delays and cost overruns and weather shutdowns and supply chain failures. He has never had to look a client in the eye and say what he said this week. He said, "We cannot finish this job. Not late, not over budget, cannot finish it at all." And somewhere in the middle of that conversation, the word Tuesday was probably on both of their minds. Because that is when it was all supposed to be fine. That is when the replacements were going to show up. They did not show up. They are not going to show up. Because they do not exist. Because the pipeline of skilled tradespeople that America stopped building 40 years ago when it decided that 4-year degrees were the only respectable path to success has not produced the people needed to fill those jobs. And the Canadian workers who stepped in to fill that gap were not a convenience. They were not a favor. They were not something to be grateful for or dismissive of or replaced by Tuesday. They were holding the American industrial economy together, and now they're gone, and the cranes are not moving. So where does this end? How does this story resolve? The Construction Industry Association has been clear. If the bilateral labor agreements are not restored, $8 billion in losses in the first year alone. The energy companies that depend on those projects have been clear. The governors of 6 states have been clear. 3 major American trade unions have been clear. The American project managers standing on half-empty job sites across the country have been clear. But here is the thing about political pride. Here is the thing about going on national television and calling an entire workforce of tens of thousands of people overrated and replaceable. Walking that back is not easy. Walking that back is an admission. And admissions are hard for people who built their entire brand on never being wrong. So those cranes may sit still for a while longer. Those timelines may continue to slip. Those cost overruns may keep climbing. And the $8 billion bill that started with a single press conference may keep growing. Meanwhile, in Alberta and Ontario and British Columbia, Those Canadian welders and iron workers and crane operators and pipe fitters are back home. Some of them are working on Canadian infrastructure projects that suddenly have all the certified labor they need. Some of them are headed to the EU, to the UK, to Australia, to the Gulf states, where the work permit processing has been expedited and the welcome is genuine. Some of them are collecting a $20,000 retention bonus funded by American tariff revenue. And some of them, like Mark, the welder who spent 12 years in Texas and trained 14 American apprentices and coached a youth baseball team on Sundays and sat in his truck for 2 days deciding whether to leave, are still thinking about what was said, still sitting with the difference between angry and hurt, still knowing what it means that a person can give 12 years to a country and be told they should be grateful for the privilege. He left. He went home. He said, "Let him try to replace me." Month 1, no replacement. The pipeline is still waiting. That is the Flash America report for today. Share this video with someone who needs to understand what is actually happening to American infrastructure and why it matters. Drop a comment below and tell me what you think the real cost of this ends up being by the end of the year, because the number I have seen, $8 billion, I think is still low. Hit subscribe. We cover the stories that tell you what is actually happening, not what someone wants you to believe is happening. Stay with Flash America. We will be right back here tomorrow.